Alright guys, welcome to F1 News. The chaos continues from the Papaya Antics at the Italian Grand Prix. Max Verstappen and other world champions giving their thoughts on whether Piastri did the wrong thing, giving the place back, and whether McLaren have simply painted themselves into a corner and will make an absolute nightmare of the rest of the season with their decision they made yesterday. What was the correct call? What does it mean going forward for the championship? Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We have so much to get into today, and we are going to begin with all of the stewarding drama of yesterday because there's so much to discuss here. The inconsistencies, the questionable rules. I actually thought that some of the changes they made to the driver regulations this season were going to make things better. I think in some respects they've made them somewhat worse. This, again, I didn't discuss this that much yesterday, but here comes Stroll along the outside, and look, Ocon moves over to the right-hand side, squeezes him very hard for sure. But look, Stroll doesn't really have any right to this corner. He moves over to the right, and yeah, there's maybe a bit of contact here. He forces Stroll off, and Stroll's off the road. Has to go off the road, come back further on. Now, look, did this deserve a penalty? I think it's the key question here, right? As Dan says, and I think it's a fair assessment, every incident does not necessarily need a penalty given out. This, to me, is pretty tame. And I don't really see that this necessarily mandated a penalty. Now, how about this one? Let's talk about Sainz versus Behrman. This is how they were shaping up on the entry into the corner. This is pretty much just before the break-in zone. They were at a pretty similar top speed at this point. Sainz was quite a long way out of the slipstream, so they're basically going the same speed. And, well, Sainz has his front axle pretty much in line with the nose of Ollie Behrman's car. So it's absolutely neck and neck going into the corner. The next screenshot then we have, of course, is this one, where Behrman clips him on the inside. Of course, as you can see, there is no space for Behrman to take this corner properly with the way that Sainz is attacking it. This was very controversial because Behrman got a 10-second penalty for this and another 2 penalty points on his license. He is now at 10 penalty points, Ollie Behrman, and he's only been racing for just over half of a season. So, of course, a fair chunk of that is on him. But there is a realistic possibility here that he follows in the footsteps of Kevin Magnussen at Haas and gets a race ban for his troubles. I mean, only a couple of penalty points now he is away from getting a race ban, which is quite remarkable, and I think, at least in this sense, entirely undeserved. I don't understand exactly what Behrman is meant to do, and we'll explain why. So, the racing rules say as follows. If we have a look at the racing rules, if you're overtaking on the inside of a corner, your front axle must be at least alongside the mirror of the other car prior to and at the apex if you are overtaking on the outside. So crucially, that's what Sainz was doing here, right? This is not Behrman throwing a nose down the inside and spinning Sainz out, in which case, yeah, for sure. But this was Behrman's position. Sainz was overtaken around the outside, and in any other motorsport series, like an IndyCar, the rules would state that the driver overtaking, it is their responsibility to complete the move cleanly. That does not seem to be a factor in F1, which is quite remarkable because you would think the driver overtaking on the outside would have a responsibility to leave space to the guy on the inside and make the move appropriately. Now look, if Behrman and Sainz went into this corner side by side and Behrman simply drove him out of road, then as long as Sainz was ahead at the apex, which is the rule for overtaking on the outside, as it says, if the front axle is ahead of the front axle of the inside car at the apex, then the guy on the inside is not able to force the guy on the outside off the road if the guy on the inside is the defending car. But in this case, they make the contact before they even got to the apex of the corner. So what I don't understand is, what exactly is Behrman meant to do? Because yes, at the apex, a couple frames forward of this, Sainz gets there first, they have contact. But of course, Sainz closes the door, he turns in, leaving no space for Behrman on the inside. And as they hit the brakes, they, weren't neck and neck. Sainz was maybe at a push half a car length in front, but probably not even a full half a car length. So what are Behrman's options? The issue, I think, with this decision, especially, is that Behrman just isn't to know what Sainz exactly is going to do. Behrman's trying to hold on to the position on the inside, and yes, you could argue that Behrman should have just backed out and given up, right? Okay, I get that. Live to fight another day. Maybe that would have been more sensible. But I think he was well within his rights to brake at this point. The issue is, if you are braking and you force Sainz off the track, maybe you feather out the brake or whatever to force him off, then that's on you. But when Behrman hits the brakes, he doesn't know when Sainz is going to hit the brakes. He doesn't know that he's going to necessarily be behind at the apex of the corner. That only becomes clear once he hits the brakes and Sainz turns in. So the implication of this is that if you're a defending driver on the inside and the guy on the outside is ahead of you at all going into the corner, I mean, what are you meant to do? You're just meant to get out of the way and yield, because if he happens to be marginally ahead when he brakes, then apparently you're now getting the penalty for hitting him on the inside. I don't know, to me this is a racing incident, or if anything, in other racing rules, this would be considered to be Sainz's fault for not cleanly overtaking on the outside. But look, Lawson got away with it, and Sainz got the punishment last time out for being on the outside and getting hit. This time, I mean, again, it feels like the driver who, you know, certainly wasn't more at fault, in my opinion, in Behrman, is the one getting punished for it. Look, not everything has to be punished. Sometimes there are racing incidents that occur. This is, you know, one to me, but I can't believe the rules are written in a way that the driver on the outside is just going to be like, all right, great, well, let me just brake late and turn in, and the guy on the inside cannot at all hold on, or he's going to get a penalty for it, right? It's not even like you're taking a risk to hope that you can make it work. Because, yeah, Behrman's taking some level of risk here, hoping that Sainz won't turn in. But the fact that he is considered at fault, I think, is pretty remarkable. The other thing, of course, is Lawson versus Yuki. So we have another moment here at the Rogers chicane. And look, this is at the braking point, pretty much. They're coming up to the braking zone right about here. So Lawson's trying to overtake again. It's pretty similar. But of course, on this occasion, Yuki, the defending car, as well on the inside. Now, Yuki was not happy about this, and I think understandably so. But to Yuki's, well, I can't really come to his defense at the end of the day, because should he be fighting a racing bull for position? Not when your teammate's winning the Grand Prix by 20 seconds. But I do think it's interesting, because at this point here, Sainz has within his rights to go for the overtake, right, in that position being ahead. But in this case, Lawson's half a car length behind. Now, again, I think this is probably a racing incident. Yuki under brakes, he moves to the right-hand side, kind of like Ocon did with Stroll, actually, squeezes Lawson out of a bit of space. Even here, Lawson can probably just back out of it, but he still tries to turn in here, Lawson. I don't really know where Lawson thinks he's going here, because they're obviously going to make contact here. Now, look, not to say that he shouldn't be able to try or whatever, but I think especially because it's another Red Bull car, I really think Lawson should have been more careful here. And yeah, I think Yuki has some part to play in moving over to the right-hand side, as you can see. But equally, I think probably right at this moment, Lawson probably should just back out of this, because there's no way you're ever making this overtake happen around the outside. You're half a car length behind. Yuki's got the inside line. You should just get out of here, right, and not cause any issues. That's what, especially when it's your own sister team or your main team, whatever. But I do think that Lawson's decision to try and keep going, even right here, like when he turns in here, like he's inevitably going to cause some sort of contact. It affects both of them. And Lawson has to give up the position because he overtook it unfairly, but he damaged Yuki's car beyond repair, and that ruined his race, and Yuki wasn't happy about it. Now, look, Lawson will not take any fault for this, and again, I think it's probably a racing incident, but I think that given the circumstances of the team, you might have expected him to yield a little bit more. And as Yuki says, you know, I picked up so much damage, very unnecessary move from Lawson. I was distracted by a guy who wasn't even in the points fighting, which is a pretty funny way for Yuki to put it. And, you know, he said in previous races too, it's happened consistently. He's an aggressive driver, that's not a bad thing, but we can't step over the line, especially when we are under the same roof. So I get Yuki's frustration. At the end of the day, was he in a great position anyway, given clearly the strength of that Red Bull this weekend's? No, but yeah, pretty controversial. Again, it was just one of those moments that the stewards might have to be thinking about. But Max Verstappen wins the race, emphatically so he will, having won another Grand Prix, ends the ground effect era with at least a 50% win rate, and if he wins anything else, then that will go even higher than that. Helmut Marko did defend Yuki and said there was contact with Lawson. Never a good thing for the teams to come into contact. I'm going to discuss the situation internally later. So yeah, it goes to show that he's not especially happy with the way that things are going there, for good reason, I would say. Now, Max, after this race, was pretty happy with a few things. Happy with the way that Laurent Marquis is working with the rest of the team, asking good technical questions. There is seemingly a good reason why there has been a trend in recent recent years, certainly with Andrea Stella at McLaren and now McKees at Red Bull, among others, of having a more technical figurehead for the team who can, let's say, ask the engineers the right questions, in the words of Max Verstappen. But Max said that he thinks there's at least a couple more Grand Prix where he will have a chance of winning between now and the end of the season. If he wins multiple Grand Prix, maybe the championship is still on, but, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. He needs to close up about 12 points every race weekend, Max, if he wants to beat Piastri. And that's a little bit far-fetched, I would say. But Marco, here we go, right? The hopium for Red Bull is back. Baku's a fast track. I'm positive about that. I'm sure there's going to be optimism for Las Vegas as well. He even says, can you believe it, I also have hope for Singapore. With this spirit, anything is possible. Max is so motivated as well. I haven't seen it in a long time. He's not talking about racing GT cars anymore either. So Helmut saying, oh, Max is fully locked in. We're going to give this title charge a good go. And then, according to AMUS today, in fact, he will be at the Nordschleife racing a GT car again. So I don't know what Marco's sources are telling him, or if he has a little chat with Max himself. But speaking of Max, he gave his thoughts on this incident of yesterday, and this has been the key talking point of the last 24 hours. This mechanic messing up the pit stop was definitely a talking point. Talk about sabotage and all this. I'm not going to get into that today. What I find more compelling is what's happening outside of the car at McLaren, and that is the decisions made on the pit wall. Piastri, during the race, said, and we're not fully sure here what's true because the team they basically dodged the question on this. Andrea Stella refused to answer any questions on it either. Piastri said on the radio, hey, as far as I was aware, the pit stop, if there was a bad pit stop, we apparently discussed, that's what Piastri said on the radio, that this would just be considered part of the fair game, and if it happens, unlucky. After the race, Andrea Stella, I don't believe that they said McLaren what was decided when it comes to pit stops before the Grand Prix and in the racing rules that they've defined for the season, the Papaya rules that everyone has been roasting for some time, and for good reason, I think. And then Piastri says, you know what, I think it was a fair request. Lando qualified ahead, he was ahead the whole race, and he lost that spot through no fault of his own, which I think is fair, right? Yeah, Lando did nothing wrong, Piastri did nothing wrong. The argument is, it is what it is, right? The results, the chips fall as they may. So one of the big questions is, should Piastri have actually done it, right? You can argue whether McLaren do the right thing in their decision. We'll see Max's opinion and Toto's opinion on that here in a second. But should Piastri have given up the position, right? Because there are certainly other drivers that would not have got anywhere near doing this. Now, I think Piastri knows how it is at McLaren, and I think he did a cost-benefit analysis here, and he said, look, if I give up this position, I lose 3 points in the championship to Lando. It's a 6-point swing, which is considerable, but it's not a 14-point swing. Had this been for the race win, well, then you've got a very different question, because if I'm Piastri in that position, I'm thinking, okay, if I yield here to what the team says, that's a big championship swing. If I just win this, I might well just put the championship to bed right here, right now. So, I think it was a decision for Piastri to make, because I don't believe that Piastri really likes what McLaren are doing. I think Piastri is a pure racer. I think certainly Mark Webber is a pure racer as manager. And I don't think he likes what they're doing. But I think that Piastri is sensible enough to know that in the circumstances, this was probably the right thing to do. In my opinion, he keeps the team on side. He keeps a little ace up his sleeve, as it were, to say at some point in the future when something goes well for Lando, hey, remember Monza, right, give me the position back or whatever, right? He keeps that in the pocket, and it was only a 6-point swing, which is not, in the grand scheme of things, maybe considerable enough. I would not be surprised if, with a few rounds to go, if this happens with 4 races to go in a tight championship fight, I don't think Piastri does it. I think Piastri, at some point this season, will be willing to just say, yeah, I don't care. Sorry, guys. Like, early in the season, when there's enough races to go, fine. But when it's really crunch time, who's going to listen, right? And it's the same thing. If this was Abu Dhabi, and this was a championship deciding second place, you think Piastri's given up the position? Absolutely no chance in hell. And other champions in the past would have done these situations differently. But also I think that depends on the way that the team is. In the Hamilton-Rosberg days, the team were pretty clear that, look, if you are the lead car, you will get boxed first. And that was almost always the way that it was. They made the drivers pay for crash damage if they crashed into each other. They knew they were winning the constructors. There was no doubt about that. So it was simply, okay, Hamilton's garage, Rosberg's garage, you guys go at it, right? Keep it hard, keep it fair, but... I mean, we might ask you on the radio to do something, but there's not necessarily a guarantee that that's going to happen. Yes, Hamilton gave up that position for Bottas back in Hungary 2017, but when Hamilton was in title battle mode, okay, with Bottas, he wasn't in real title battle there, right? It was pretty inevitable Hamilton was going to beat him. Whereas with Rosberg, because it was a proper title battle, Hamilton was an absolutely ruthless driver. You don't win 7 world championships without being ruthless. And I still think Hamilton has that in there if he had a great car and was in a championship battle. I mean, we know how serious things got between Verstappen and Hamilton back in 2021, Hamilton in Silverstone, Verstappen in Monza, right? I mean, it was only a few years ago where we were seeing Verstappen, I mean, what did he say? Like, throw his car on top of Hamilton or whatever at the first chicane. And then a few years later, we're seeing title rivals give up positions for team orders. How times have changed, right? But when Hamilton was asked 2016 or whatever to give up position to Nico, he's like, yeah, good luck with that. Max in the press conference afterwards told the media, oh, I don't want to comment on this. But when the Dutch media asked him what he thought, he said, he usually talks to the Dutch media, I wouldn't have done it. And look, we know what happened, right? Brazil 2022, whatever, right? When Max was asked to yield to Perez and he was like, I ain't doing that. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not listening. And that is the way that most champions. I think that if Piastri was driving for a different team, I think he would be the same way, to be honest. But I think with McLaren, he just feels that it's better off keeping them on side for the time being until it is less convenient to do so. But have McLaren really put themselves in a particularly challenging spot here? Because Toto says, you've now set a precedent which is very difficult to undo. What if the team does another mistake and it's not a pit stop? Do you switch them around in that case? And this is actually very interesting. Maybe the correct decision would be for McLaren to say, look, guys, we're not really going to get in the way here. No more papaya bollocks. We've already won the constructors. Like, you guys just have at it. And, Piastri's team, Norris's team, whatever. And just don't crash into each other, please. Right, like that would be one way of approaching it, and basically say we're not going to mess around any more than that. Now, as I said yesterday, I think really what the precedent they set to some degree was Hungary last year. That was, I was of the opinion last year in Hungary that Lando shouldn't have given up the win. And I still stand by that. But I think they're blackmailing Lando on the radio, as it seemed to be like it was last year. And then, of course, everything that's happened since then led them to the point where yesterday's decision, I felt like McLaren were always going to do it. Like, as soon as this happened, I thought they're going to ask Piastri to yield here, for sure. And that's what they did. I guess to Lando's credit, he never asked them to. He never came on the radio to ask them. Piastri and Silverstone did say, I don't think the penalty is fair. Can we, swap positions and race or whatever? And he was like, it was pretty optimistic for me to ask, but I might as well try. To Lando's credit, I guess he didn't bother, but the team, even since Hungary, and whether you consider that to be relevant or not last year, the reality is that they've made this decision that a error from the team that has affected things is being considered when it comes to what they call fairness. So, what if there's a strategy mistake, or what if a driver is disadvantaged because of a safety car? What do you do then, right? Like, some driver gets unlucky because of a safety car, but actually, let's say Piastri was leading the whole race, and then he pits, and then, oh wow, a safety car happens, and after the safety car, Lando's P1, Oscar's P2. Are you going to say, Lando, oh, this is unfair because Oscar was leading it the whole year? It's like, if Lando is in Abu Dhabi 23 points behind, and Oscar DNFs, and Lando can win, and therefore win the championship, are they, as a team, going to come on the radio and say, Lando, Oscar's DNF, mate? I think it would be really unfair. He's been leading the championship basically the whole season, Lando. Like, he deserves... Like, what are you going to do, right? We can't be serious. So, I think Toto makes an interesting point here. Alex Brundle does also say that as far as he is concerned, and he is aware, they have a load of racing rules, like pre-agreed racing rules over this type of stuff. So his opinion is that this doesn't change things because all it changes is what happens in that specific moment. If there's other things, I'm sure they also have their own protocol to what happens if there's a safety car, if there's a VSC, if there's some sort of, incident of the race. But look, Norris DNF'd in the Dutch Grand Prix. It's not like the team were going to tell Piastri to pull over at the side of the road and give up the win, right? So, you could argue this is kind of nuanced, but Verstappen and others are like, McLaren just can't get involved in this type of stuff. I think the long term, yeah, their car this year is too good, but long term, this is the type of stuff that will come back to bite them. It still doesn't feel like they're operating quite in the way that a ruthless world championship operation tends to operate. And Max says, look, it can happen, an engine can break, you make a mistake, that's part of racing. So, I had to laugh a little that he gave the position back. I'll leave it there, Max said, but he did go on further to say that, yeah, he would never have given that position back in a million years. Now, speaking of Max, Toto is continuing his courtship of the reigning world champion. He says today there was one driver who makes everyone else look stupid. Now, Toto made some very interesting remarks on his own drivers yesterday, and I'll go through a couple of them just before we close out the video. One of which was this, where he said, none of us performed on the level that you need to make the podium. There's never a reason. The chassis, the tyres, the drivers, it all goes hand in hand, and if there's a weak link, you're losing. Now, this is interesting because I don't really know what more Russell could have done exactly. Max was clearly the fastest man, then there were the two McLarens, and Russell wasn't really all that far behind. I think they were like 12 seconds Mercedes behind the McLarens, which on paper is a pretty good weekend, but it wasn't good enough in the end. But Toto's saying, yeah, the drivers weren't good enough, implying Russell as well, of course, wasn't good enough himself to be on the podium. And I think the only way that Toto can really justify that is just to say, well, in his opinion, if Max was in that car, then it would be a different story. And look, yes, he has said Russell and Antonelli will be next year's drivers, but there's still not been any contract announcements as of yet. So I guess we'll see. And Toto also was very critical of Antonelli. And yeah, Antonelli did not have a good weekend, but again, he wasn't a million miles away from Russell in qualifying. His race pace wasn't great. The qualifying crash was bad because, put him into the gravel, lost a load of practice running. That was not good for the team. And look, Toto says, I think he's going to be very, very, very good, but he was underwhelming. Underwhelming. Today was underwhelming. You can't put the car in the gravel and expect to be there. All of the race was underwhelming. So kind of the first time I've heard Toto be so critical on Kimi, and I think some of it's deserved, but also it wasn't like a horrific, it wasn't Antonelli's worst weekend precisely, but it wasn't a great one for his Italian Grand Prix debut. So when Toto's being so critical of his own drivers shortly after a Grand Prix where he gives Max Verstappen all the credit in the world, I think it's pretty clear what his intentions are. So very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.